We bring in Rohit Kumar, principal co-leader of the Washington National Tax Service at PwC. Spent some time, in fact, a good chunk of time working for Mitch McConnell, and can help us understand the behind-the-scenes conversations that are happening when deadlines are approaching and deals are being made or not. In the case of today, Rohit, it's great to see you. You surprised your old boss went back to the Capitol on his own today. Does that tell us how much ground there is between these two, the gap between these two Republicans when it comes to the matter of Ukraine?
So not particularly surprised, because the gap was known going in. And look, I hate to burst anybody's bubble about what happens in these meetings, but I participated in probably several dozen Oval Office meetings during my time working on Capitol Hill. I can't remember a single one where I felt like we really advanced the ball. Like we walked to that meeting, we're like, wow, we really achieved something today, right? It just tends to be the same talking points you see on the House and Senate floor, transmitted in private, in the Oval Office. No one's going to make a big concession in that room. Those breakthroughs, those negotiation breakthroughs, they happen in smaller rooms, in one-on-one negotiations, typically in the Capitol, not in the Oval Office. So every Oval Office meeting I went to was just like an hour or two of couldn't have my phone, was going to be horribly behind on email, and we would just read our talking points to one another and then go back and, get back to the real work.
Well, Mike Johnson suggested that work to avoid a shutdown has been happening around the clock, even though the House isn't even back in session yet. They all return tomorrow, at which point there will be about 72 legislative hours left to avert a shutdown. Do you believe their optimism on the idea that they're getting close to something that would avert a shutdown?
Yeah, so that optimism is actually is consistent with what I've been hearing in my own conversations, which is that there really is a sense that we're going to get there and avoid a shutdown.
How?
It's I think, look, you got to pass, either you're going to pass the 4 appropriations bills that expire on the 1st, or you're going to have a temporary continuing resolution. And I know in the past the Speaker has said no continuing resolutions, but yet we still have managed to do them in one form or another. And I think, look, at root, everyone understands that nothing is achieved by a shutdown. I have been a part of a number of shutdown exercises. I've witnessed them from afar. I can't think of a single one where, as a result of the shutdown, somebody got something that they weren't going to get already, that they somehow gained leverage in the negotiation. In fact, if anything, in shutdowns, especially the ones that go longer than a couple of days, you tend to lose leverage. You end up getting less than you could have gotten on the front end, because the shutdown is a self-inflicted political injury. As my old boss, Senator McConnell, has said repeatedly, Republicans kind of own the brand on shutdowns, and not to their advantage, but largely to their detriment. And so I think most people understand, not all to be clear, but most understand that you actually don't get much out of a shutdown, and if anything, you might lose something.
Rohit, having been in the room for a couple of these, to your point, as the Deputy Chief of Staff to the leader, Domestic Policy Director, you're giving us a sense of what you made of the language coming out of this, but I wonder your thoughts on what the real priorities were. Mike Johnson came out first and foremost talking about the border. Was this a meeting about Ukraine or about a government shutdown?
Look, I mean, once you're in the room, you're talking about everything. But at some level, no huge surprise that Speaker Johnson would come out and talk about immigration and talk about the border, right? All the sort of public polling would suggest that immigration is top of mind for voters. So that makes perfect sense. It's something that Republicans have cared deeply about for, this is not like a new revelation that Republicans care about this issue. And so what that tells me is, look, of all of the things that are floating around in the government funding conversation, immigration is where Speaker Johnson is kind of, putting his chips in the middle. And so I would be looking and paying attention to what, if any, concessions are made, negotiations are had around immigration, whether that, and interestingly, he particularly called out the president and the ability for the president to engage in his own executive action, something which has been clearly, it's been reported that the administration is considering anyway. So I would be looking for money on immigration and maybe some policy, but maybe that policy is not legislative policy, but executive action policy.
There's something else I'd like to ask you about, given your experience with Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, Rohit, which is that there's been reporting this week that there are back-channel efforts underway to secure McConnell's endorsement of former President Trump. Of course, we've seen pretty much all of the Senate leadership at this point do so, but Trump is someone that McConnell has called practically and morally responsible for what happened at the Capitol on January 6th. He hasn't exactly been shy about his disdain for some of the former president's policies, actions, even words he's spoken against McConnell's wife. Does it surprise you that McConnell would consider endorsing Trump at this point?
Yeah, so look, I mean, the one thing I will say is that Leader McConnell has been consistent that he would endorse and support the Republican nominee for president. And so despite whatever else he has said about former President Trump, he's also said he would endorse the Republican nominee. And to the extent that former President Trump ends up being the Republican nominee, that would pave a path for that potentially to happen. I think it's too soon to say for sure which way this is going to go or how this is all going to shake out. But he has been clear that he would support the Republican nominee for president.
There's a lot there, considering the impact that Donald Trump could have on this very issue of Ukraine. Where are you on Ukraine funding, Rohit? We've kind of danced around this a little bit. Is that something that will be addressed once the shutdown is either avoided or cleared somehow?
Yeah, I mean, look, Speaker Johnson alluded to this. He said we're looking at all options. They're clearly looking for a third way, right? Way one would be the Senate bill. Way two would be to do nothing. And way three would be to find some other version of compromise legislation. Again, it's clear immigration is top of mind. And while there was an effort that ultimately failed in the Senate to, resolve that issue, maybe the House can find, a different approach that is more to the liking of House Republicans that can pass. But I don't think this issue is going away. Remember, it's not just Ukraine funding; it's also Israel funding. Right. It's also there's some Taiwan money in there as well. So there's more to it than Ukraine, even though Ukraine has been kind of dominating the political headlines.